got it. Beautiful. All righty. So I'll just quickly turn this off 1 second because my nose keeps disappearing. How do I turn this off? Now I'm having a bit of a glitch. There we go. That's better. No? Okay, cool. All right, awesome. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming along to our Monday webinar with Shane Story from Story and Associates. Story and Associates? Associates. I just made up a name for your company. Wonderful. My name is Zibunisa. I'm your trusted mortgage advisor down in Wellington and Kapiti region. So if you'd like, please stay along for the webinar. If you've got any questions, leave them in the chat room or on YouTube, and we will come back to them. So tonight, Shane has a wonderful presentation for us about how the birth rates are going to predict the future of the housing market. Shane, thank you so much for coming along. Really appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just bring up my PowerPoint, do I?
Yes, you can, and I'll give you even permission to share that. How about that? There you go. I've given you permission to share your presentation.
Right, so can you see it now?
Not yet. Did you go share?
Share taskbar. Is it share taskbar?
Where is your right-hand beautiful son-in-law that usually helps us?
Yeah, he's not here tonight, unfortunately. Hang on.
Oh, I see. That explains everything now, Shane.
Yeah, thanks. Now, so on here, what do you say? Share screen?
Yes. And then you should be able to share the presentation.
Share that one. Right. Is that working?
Beautiful. Yes, we can see.
Okay. Right, this is my theory on demographics. It is a theory. I can't guarantee that it's accurate, but it's a line of thought I've been following for quite some time. Okay, so mainstream economics via the news media tries to explain the last 10 years economic activity, but the underlying theories do not forecast or did not forecast the Great Depression, the GFC, or why an economic boom may start or stop. They're very good at looking behind, but they're difficult at trying to see the future. And like on the beach, this is what I call a wave theory. You can see the waves coming in, and if you're there enough, you can actually predict the kind of waves that are coming in. But there's an alternative, and it's unconventional economic theory, and it's based on birth rates, demographics. By understanding the demographics, the birth rates, we can forecast the scale and the patterns of consumer behavior into the future. And this is what I call the tide. So people watch the waves come in, but they forget, what is the tide doing coming in, coming out? How does it work? All right, Harley Davidson. When do you buy your Harley Davidson? At what age? And it's 50. It's pretty clear. So when I saw that graph, I also remembered a marketing study we did at uni in my first year. And they were talking about Harley Davidsons, how they almost went bankrupt in the 80s. Now, they blamed the Japanese imports, and they were making inroads, and they had very poor quality control. I think if you turn left, the indicator automatically indicated right or something crazy like that. This is wave theory. They look at the current and say, oh, this is what's causing the problem. But the question I had is, what happened to Harley Davidson 50 years prior to 1980? And this is what I call tide theory. Now, here are the birth rates of America. And if you take 1980 minus 50, you end up with 1930, right at the beginning of the Depression. And as you can see there, the birth rates fell from 3.3 million to 2.6 million over that period of time, over this period of time here. So if 1 in 100 people are buying a Harley Davidson when they turn 50, Harley Davidson sales went from 33,000 to 26,000 50 years later. Now, Harley Davidson has recognised this problem. They've done very well in these years, but since 2001, they've been struggling because, again, the birth rate's dropped. So they started targeting different demographics, and they targeted women. And my cousin his partner has a pink Harley. Very nicely done, but it's just unusual to see this pink Harley Davidson button. They also targeted different markets in the world that were showing similar growth patterns of 50-year-olds like this. One of them was China. So as they were targeting China to start selling into China, Donald Trump had a trade war and the bikes got banned from being sold in China. Anyhow, this is the problem that they're dealing with now. So that got me wondering, what do the New Zealand birth rates look like? And we have some fairly critical periods of time. This drop was caused not by deaths in the Second World War, but the birth rates dropped because all the young guys had gone to North Africa. They came back in 1943 because in 43 we beat the Germans and the Italians, and the New Zealanders had been away for 3 years, so they got sent home. And it was decided to send the Kiwis back, and they thought they were going to go to the Pacific to fight against the Japanese. But the Americans stepped in and said, well, you already know how to beat the Italians and the Germans in the Mediterranean. There's no point retraining you. We'll send you there back. And a ruling came out. We had a chronic manpower shortage because we were supplying the American armed forces in the Pacific with food. So farming was critical. And so a ruling came out that if you've served and had children, you don't have to go again. And some bright spark said, and if your wife is pregnant. And ironically, our baby boom started in 1943, not 1946 like the rest of the world. And the baby boom stopped in 1961 with the pill. Now, these dates will have some relevance as I explain what can happen. And these are the baby boomer generations. It's Generation X, Eco Boomers, Generation Z, etc. But I'll come back to these dates. All right. At 47 years old, we are at our peak earning and spending. At the point where the kids start to leave home and our income stay the same, if not rising, but our expenditure drops. Therefore, is it possible that we could explain economic activity by birth rates 47 years ago? Now, this is a bit contentious, but if you have a look at this, in 1987, what happened in 87? We had the share market crash, which happens to be the same when you take 47 years off that. That's 1940, when all our young men left. In 1990, our economy turned. We didn't realise it. We were in a recession. And it boomed for quite a few years. We had a recession during this time. And yet, from 1943 onwards, 47 equals 1990, through to 2008, we had pretty much a boom. But in 2008, what did we have? The GFC, which happens to be 47 years after the pill came in, 1961, when the baby boom stopped.
That's bizarre. That's some witchery there, Shane.
Yeah, very much. But if you think it in terms of, in the 70s, you could get a loan for 2/3 of the value of a property. And people would quite often get a second and third mortgage. Then the banks let you go up to 70, 75, 80, 85, 90. And by 2008, we had the ninja loans. We had them here in New Zealand. You could go to 100%. In the States, you could go to 120%. And I had clients in 2009 to 2010 go to Nevada and buy houses that were in tax law. Basically, the rates hadn't been paid. And in the States, the rates don't just pay for the council, it also pays for teachers, fire and police. So we may pay $2,000 to $3,000 rates here. In the States, it's $20,000 to $30,000, so it's quite a bit more. And as people walked away from their homes, they handed the keys to the banks. The banks couldn't pay the rates because there were so many homes being abandoned. So the councils put these houses up for sale in the tax law. And you could buy houses for like 20 cents on the dollar. Well, I had one client who came up to a beautifully made house, it was only a couple of years old, walked through the front door and it's still fully furnished with the latest fashion, stainless steel fridges and freezers and whiteware, which was actually stainless steel. And they called up the bank and said, what do we do with this? And they said, it goes with the house. Oh. The husband walks into the garage and sees a Beamer, brand new one. Again, call up the bank. And as he's saying, what do we do with the Beamer? The wife yells out, to hell with the Beamer, what do we do with the plane? And this house had two garage doors. One took the plane out to the runway at the back of the house, and the other one took the car out to the street. The estates had gone to that point. Now, why did banks get to that point? Because year on year on year, they became more confident in lending because banks, mortgagee holders, were not defaulted. But become 2008, and the spending stopped, and the incomes dropped, and suddenly they can't pay the mortgages. And why did it stop? Because 47 years prior, the pill came in. So my assertion is, did the pill cause the GFC? So if we follow this through, 2012, 2010, we should have had actually a much more severe recession, according to this. But something happened in New Zealand, and that was the Christchurch earthquake. And in a $200 billion economy, we had a $50 billion rebuild, which meant the GFC, we didn't see the most severe sides of that as they did in the States. Now, 2008, the economy's done okay. We've had recession, well, not recession as such, but we've had COVID. And COVID's sort of thrown everything out of line. But the underlying spending is not there. And we could be facing a downturn, although we're seeing that with interest rates.
Well, we're sort of in a recession at the moment, aren't we, Shane? Isn't that what the government wants us to believe?
It's sort of been triggered by interest rates. So it's a little bit easy for me to say, oh, that's why. But the underlying tide is saying that there's not going to be a lot of booming economic growth. Whereas the wave theory, the interest rates and so on are saying, no, they're going to be suppressing the economy. Again, this is a theory. It's a line of thinking that there could be an alternative explanation.
Okay.
All right, so average property cycles. When do we spend on property? At 21, student rentals. And this is my market. This is where I've got my property investments in it. Average age of a renter is 26. First home buyer, 31. Second trade-up home is 42. Because at 42, your 14-year-old child, which on average, has outgrown the house, your teenage kids, and you have to move from your first home to your second home. 47 is peak spending. At 48, you have your Beamer, your boat, and your beach badge. 63, you retire to the beach. So there's actually two critical ages in beach property demand. 72, granny flat. This is where grandma, quite often granddad's died, or grandma and granddad are finding the family home they've had since they were 42. It's outgrowing them. They now need to scale down. So a lot of the family homes are now coming up for sale based on 72, because they then move into the 1-2 bedroom granny flat. And at 83, on average, they move into retirement homes, nursing homes. All right, so when I saw these statistics, I started to apply them to the New Zealand birth rates. And here is the student demand. Now, we have, for the last 12 years, I have had to constantly upgrade my houses because the market is constantly contracting with the number of 21-year-olds coming into Palmerston North to go to university. And this year is the toughest year. And 2/3 of my properties have families in them at the moment. They don't have students because the demand is just not there. This year is supposed to be the toughest year, and it has been hard to find students. But for the next 6 years, there's going to be a student housing crisis around the country. Because 21 years ago, for some unknown reason, birth rates lifted, and lifted quite dramatically.
Shane, I'll just stop you for 1 second there. I just want to challenge you on something. With those numbers there, with the students, do you think it's also the drop of students in general wanting to study?
Well,
and also moving to a lot of online studies.
I have been involved in the student market prior to 1991, and I have seen this downturn, and I've seen this upturn, and I've experienced this one recently. There is, on average, 1 in 10 New Zealanders have a degree.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, they do online, but it's not just the study that the students go to university for. They also go to university for the social side.
That's right. That's right.
So yes, they can be stuck with their noses in the screens, but that's not a lot of fun, and especially if you're living with mum and dad. And my own kids are in the zone of going to university. And one of them has chosen to go to Otago. And she has met a whole different group of friends and does a whole bunch of different things down in Otago that she wouldn't do if she'd gone to here.
That's right.
The same numbers do go. Yes, they go overseas, but they also come back. This green line is actually the number of 21-year-olds in the country at that point in time. And I have found it to be unreliable. So I'm going back to what were the birth rates 21 years ago, and they give us an indication of where the market will go. Now, the severity of the climb or the fall may change, but there's still, the tide still flows in or out, according to what we see with the birth rates.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So this is something I'm looking at doing with, and especially with the unitary chain has come in, we are seriously looking at taking the flats that we do have, lifting them, and putting another flat underneath. Now, my specialties are 6, 7-bedroom flats. So we'll just lift the whole house up and put another 7-bedroom flat underneath, identical to the one on top, with the housing density.
And you get the benefits of the taxation, which we've discussed a couple of webinars ago. So for those that haven't watched that webinar, please go and watch. And Shane explained all about the benefits of that.
So next year we'll be telling to see what the demand is. And if this is right, then I will seriously be looking at lifting the houses and putting in more student flats. All right, renters. The average age of a renter is 26-year-olds. This is where we are at in the graph here with the demand. Now, next year, there'll be a drop. Following year, it'll lift again. But that's the low point here. I think that's what, 2029? Oh, yeah, it is 2029. Then there'll be another rental crisis between these years. First home buyers. Now, here's the reason why there was a crisis. Over this 7-year period, year on year on year, there were more 31-year-olds looking for homes. And in actual fact, by 2021, the average age had got to 34 because they've become a backlog. And this is why rents rose as well, because they were waiting to buy a house. That's actually changed. And the demand is falling and will fall for the next 10 years, year on year. But from 2033 to 2039, that 6-year period, there will be another housing crisis. It's already preordained, according to this theory. Right, beach batches. The demand from 48-year-olds and 63-year-olds. 2010 in Foxton, I saw several clients were doing developments out there. They didn't have them finished by 2010, and a lot of them took heavy hits because the demand dropped off. Now, since it's been rising, it's sort of stabilized, but the demand's actually going to fall over the next few years. 72-year-olds, this is the grannies. The demand for 1 and 2 bedroom flats is going to rise steadily for the next 10 years. But conversely, the empty nests, the 3-4 bedroom family home that these people are selling will come on the market. And there will be similar supply, instead of demand, a supply of these type of houses. I'll come back to that in a moment. So the sale of empty nests, the demand will be, the supply of them will be coming more and more onto the market. Now, here's a first home demand. Here's a supply of empty nests. There's a crossover point in here. We're here at the moment. So at the moment, there's still more first home demand than what there is empty nest supply. So how do they fill it? They build. There's a deficit, there's a surplus. The problem is, at this point here, the market sees the demand for this number of houses. It takes 18 months to build them, but when they have them finished, the demand has fallen. And we could well be looking at an oversupply. So the demand is, the supply was based on the demand back here in 2023. 18 months later, the demand was 6,360. The market builds them, but now the demand is only 6,000. So there'll be a surplus. So it's when you have these converging, you've got to be careful that the market doesn't overshoot the mark. These are some old figures. Again, if you took it from the year 2022, it would be a demand for 9,000. But by the time they're finished, there's only demand for 6. Okay, come back into mortgages. At 42, again, as I said before, at 42, on average, your first child is 14. And they have outgrown the house. And I know with my kids, we had a room where they would go into their own living area and watch their own TV and programs and My Little Ponies, and just to drive me nuts. But anyhow, at 42, you need to you either add another room to your house or you upgrade. So at that point, this is your peak mortgage. So at 42 is the peak mortgage. And let's say it's 900,000. Therefore, at 31, when you bought your first home, you're at 66% of that peak, 594,000. At 50, you've paid some of the mortgage down. You're about 89%. You're down to 800,000. By the time you're 63, you're down to 40%, 360,000 on average. Right. I plugged this into a graph, but this is what it looks like. And I plugged this into a matrix, an algorithm, to see where the demand is for mortgages based on birth rates. And we came up with this. Now, this is a 5-year average. And in the last few years, we've seen interest rates falling because the demand has actually been falling for mortgages. the total mortgage. Here's the actual year on year on year. Now, it was supposed to have fallen last year. It didn't. But with that, we had the Ukraine war and inflation blew out and the Reserve Bank pumped interest rates up. But they are actually due to come back. But when they do come back, they'll start, in the next few years, they will go back to the higher levels like they were back here, as the different demographics move through. So, is today's economic activity dictated by birth rates 47 years ago? Any questions?
Thank you, Shane. If you want, you can stop sharing the screen if you like. Awesome. Cool. So, guys, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat box or raise your hand and I'll give you the turn to speak. My main question first, Shane. Have you got a Harley Davidson?
No. No, I have a Mustang instead.
Okay. Airplane?
Am I playing?
Airplane. Have you got an airplane?
No, I don't have a plane. I've got, but I have a Mustang that does the speed.
Okay. Beach badge?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So you're on track. You're on track.
Okay.
All right. We're getting some comments there saying very interesting. Thank you very much. All right. So do these numbers take into account the families that are returning back from the UK, US, Europe, etc.?
What's interesting is that by the time we get to 50, the number of 50-year-olds born in New Zealand equal the number of 50-year-olds in New Zealand. Kiwis come home.
Okay.
So the immigration equals the immigration. So some people have left on a permanent basis, but the number of that have come back are equal.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what one I found quite interesting.
Yeah.
And then after that, natural attrition starts kicking in, and the numbers fall.
Oh, that's right. Now, in your stats, did you also consider international students? Because obviously I was one once upon a time,
yes.
in Palmerston North.
Well, when we go back to that one on the 21-year-olds, I had that graph that had the green, and it was 2017. After that, I stopped recording because although they're unreliable and they can swing quite dramatically one year to another, what they do is that they increase or decrease the curve, but they don't change the direction.
Mm-hmm.
They will. So there will be more, there may be more or less, but if the numbers are increasing, that still happens. The demand increases. It's just the magnitude.
So if you're a business owner right now, what would be your advice for them, given the demographics we know? Should they be looking into opening more Harley Davidson stores or, I don't know.
It depends what's your age group. You
Mm-hmm.
can predict, apparently you can predict potato chip demand. And it's dictated to by the number of 42-year-old women in New Zealand. Because at 42, they're feeding their hungry teenagers carbohydrates. They're 14-year-olds. So you can judge potato chip sales by the number of 42-year-old women in New Zealand.
I love it. I feel like a lot of 42-year-old women I know, they tend to be mums of younger kids because I've noticed.
Those with degrees tend to be 3 years behind.
Uh-huh.
Because they have their children 3 years later.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, yeah.
But again, those with degrees are only 10% of the population, of any given population. So they don't have a large effect on the average.
Okay.
But if you can work out whatever segment you're working to, that is you give me the average age and I can give you the future. For instance, students, we can predict their demand for the next 21 years. I can't predict the 22nd year because they haven't been born yet. Mm-hmm. So like in the mortgage industry, you can see the trends. When are the first home buyer is going to be coming in more and more. And if you have a package, the second home buyers, when they're coming in, are they demand up or down? And the packages that suit that age group.
At that point.
Yeah.
So if you were an investor, which you are right now, and I know you've mentioned for some of your flats, you're looking at maybe lifting some, putting some under. But if you're a general investor, an average investor, what would be your strategy today?
Well, if you're looking at student rentals, according to that graph, I'm not saying it because I don't know anyone's individual circumstances, but that graph would say buy flat out because there's going to be a huge boom over the next 6 years, especially the 6 and 7 bedrooms, which is what I target. That's where I make my money. First-time buyers, if you're building for that market, you may actually find that that demand is falling and it will fall for the next 10 years. It depends which part of the market you want to target. 1 and 2 bedroom flats, there's going to be demand for those for the next 10 years. As those who are retiring and hitting 72 are selling up their empty nest. It's an indication where the tide is flowing from and to. Each region will have its own peculiarities. Palms North, one peculiarity is student rentals. Tauranga, Nelson, their peculiarities are retirees.
Kapiti, the capital.
Yeah, of course.
Retirees, absolutely. I mean, just around the corner from me, there is a new retirement village is coming out.
Well, that's another interesting demographic there, because those who are moving into nursing homes, 83 years ago, the birth rates dropped. And they didn't pick up for another 3 years because granddad was away in North Africa. I mean, so that the number of kids weren't being born 83 years later. Is that going to have an effect on retirement homes, nursing homes? That's the question.
Fascinating, fascinating. Let me just have a look what other questions we've got here. A funny one. Would you like a funny one? What does average mean? Not everyone has a beach badge.
No. On average, that's when people buy. So if for instance, 20% of the population buy a beach badge, that 20% is fairly consistent over several generations. It might go to 18, it might go to 22, but it does stay in that zone. And it gives you an indication. And the critical one is, when does it turn? When does it turn up? And when does it turn down? It gives you a direction where it's going. How severe is it going to be either way? It can't predict. But it's like when the tide goes out. You know it's going to go out, but you don't know where the water level is going to be because the waves coming in.
So you've got to have a surfboard ready. Awesome. Shane, this has been really cool. It'll be really interesting to see where we're heading with this, because at the moment, obviously, there's a lot of instability in the country and a lot of, the talks about living costs and how expensive it is to be in New Zealand right now versus the greener grass in Australia. And I know I've been talking to a few people and they're going, oh, we're hemorrhaging New Zealanders. New Zealanders are living to go overseas. What's your view on this? Do you think they will be back by the time they're 50?
We've seen this cycle time and time again. And again, it depends on age rates. The young ones will go overseas, but they tend to come home. And I can think of my own cousins over the last 40 years. They've gone overseas, they've come back again. Kiwis do tend to come back. And it just depends on the age groups, depending on how many people come, how many people go. But by the time we get back to 50, what's interesting is we have the same number of 50-year-olds in New Zealand as what we had born 50 years ago.
Absolutely. I'm getting some side comments here. There are 12 million Kiwi passports, while in the country there are 5 million. I guess a lot of, overseas people like me, they come to New Zealand, they settle down, they get the New Zealand passport, and then not like me, people might go somewhere else, right? So there might be New Zealand passport holders. So do you think changes in the birth rates will lead to shifts in housing trends of what we're doing with houses?
Well, first home buyers, this graph was predicting the next 31 years. I can't predict 32 years or 33 or 34 because I don't know what the birth rates are in the next 2 or 3 years. The demand for the second home, I can predict up to 42, but I can't do 43.
Uh-huh.
The 1 and 2 bedroom granny flat, I can predict for the next 72 years, but I can't predict the 73rd year because that depends on the birth rates next year.
So do you update your stats every year, Shane?
I actually don't need to because the birth rates have already happened. So the birth rates today won't have an effect on student housing for 21 years in 2044.
Right.
So do I need to update today's birth rates? No. But if I was predicting Montessori demand for kids between 2 and 5, then yes, I would need to keep updating it because that's going to happen in the next, so the average between 2 and 5 is, what's that, 2.5, 3, let's say it's 3. I'm going to need to know what the 3-year-old demand was, 3-year-old birth rates were 3 years ago to be able to see what's happening. It depends on which market you're going to target.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is fascinating. I mean, obviously to me as well as an investor myself, I need to be thinking too, what my strategy is going to be. And when I'm advising people as well, what they should be doing. Awesome. We'll just open up to the floor. Hey guys, do you have any questions you want to ask before we'll let Shane go? Because poor man sitting there on a Monday night in his office all by himself.
I'll jump in for a moment.
Sure.
Question for you: for when you go back to your home country, when did the baby boom started in your home country? Probably 46, when the young men came back from the Second World War.
Yeah, good. I will definitely look it up and have a look.
But New Zealand started 3 years before.
3 years earlier. Yeah.
So we were out of sync. We didn't come back into sync until 1961, when the pill kicked in.
When the pill came in, that's right. And I love how 1987 was an absolute boom and was a great year. There was a year when I was born. So thank you. I really enjoyed that in your presentation.
Well, in New Zealand, we had a boom, but then we had a major crash with the 87 share market crash.
I know, that's what happened. That's what I do. I become like a great boom, and if you don't follow me, you crash and burn. Oh, so would the same statistics apply in places like Japan, France, Spain, Italy, all the places that had the World War II huge effect?
Well, Japan is going to go from 120 million to 80 million in the next 40 years.
Wow.
China is going to grow old before it grows rich. It's going to go from 1.2 billion to 800 million.
Wow.
In 40 years. China has actually peaked. The boom was going to come from India. India hasn't stopped growing and won't stop growing until 2050. I think the predictions are.
Wow.
So those ripple effect all the way through with the different ages and so on. The 21st century is going to be India's century. And the same with countries in Africa. They're going to have the mega cities in there as those populations keep growing. But they will hit a certain point. And this has happened in Japan and it's happened in Korea, and China, the one child policy. It's now become too expensive to have more children. So we're getting less than 2 child per female. We need 2.1 per female to sustain a population. And I think China's down to 1, if not lower. Japan's down to 0.6. So many are not having children.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, the interesting fact, obviously, my country borders with China. And what happened was, I don't remember when, again, I need to look it up, but after that one child policy kicked in, and you know how they were only wanted boys in China. And what happened 20 years later is all these boys grew up and there were not many females to marry.
Mm.
So they would go next door to neighboring countries and try to find a wife from countries like mine that had a lot of girls, and they would try to marry someone from my country. So it was really interesting to see that happening as well, how China didn't see that coming.
They're talking about 30 to 40 million men are not going to get married in China.
Mm.
I mean, that's half the population of France or half the population of England. That's a lot of people. These guys are not going to marry and not going to have children.
Yeah, yeah. Investors know data and predictions, so they take an action. So how will it impact on overall trends?
They follow the wave theory. They don't follow the tide. I have seen very, very little research done based on birth rates. What I have seen is trends of the last 5-10 years, but they haven't been following what's been going on the birth rates based on those age cycles.
Hmm. Okay. And yes, I do have 4 children. Thank you. Someone's commenting that I've got.
So do I.
And you have 4 children. There you go. We're
Yeah,
helping.
Love them nuts. Love them to bits.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, guys, if you don't have any more questions, should we wrap it up? Shane, I will leave this video on YouTube as well. I'll send you the link after so you can share with your people. And we'll share it. We had a few people watching us on YouTube. We had good team here as well. So good turnout. Thanks, Shane. This was incredibly insightful, and really hope that this will help other people make certain decisions. And I'm really going to be curious to see if my husband will end up buying a Harley Davidson in 5 years' time. I will let you know what happens on that front. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic Monday night. Thank you, Shane, for joining us. And guys, if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me and Shane, and we'll help you and guide you through this uncertain times. Election is only, what, 6 weeks away?